Guys, we will go ahead and get started. Mackenzie, if you can hit record for us for today's session, we are recording. We welcome all of our HylandWIN members. Again, feel free to turn on your cameras and also engage in the chat throughout today's presentation. My name is Colleen Heine, and I am the Technical Programming Lead. On behalf of our entire HylandWIN committee, we want to welcome you to today's session. We're going to begin with a couple of reminders, upcoming events, both hosted by HylandWIN and those being presented throughout the Hyland community. So to start, we have an upcoming presentation series. Hyland is excited to announce a lineup of incredible speakers. These are actually starting October 26th, and you may have heard Bill mention it's going to be an extended Monday morning meeting format. So the traditional Monday morning meeting will start, and then this additional time, 30 minutes of dialogue, 15 minutes of questions and answers, give the floor to these speakers that are centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We encourage the HylandWIN members to attend these sessions or carve out time afterwards to watch the recordings. The next event was actually shared with us by Ed McQuiston. And so with his permission, we're promoting it here to the HylandWIN community. We encourage our members to attend this event, which is titled Energy Management and the New Normal. It's going to be on October 28th at 10:30 Eastern. If you check out the HylandWIN Pages site, we have additional information, including the Zoom login details. So next we have the HylandWIN Q4 events. It's crazy to think we're already at the end of the year, but when we look to our November event, we're thrilled to welcome June Ryan. She's a retired Rear Admiral for the U.S. Coast Guard, and honestly, an amazing motivational speaker. I was lucky enough to sit in with June on some pre-interview conversations. She already warned us to let members know this is going to be one of those high-impact presentations you do not want to miss. She actually told us to remind everyone, make sure you wear pants to the Zoom, because you'll be jumping up, you're going to be moving around, you're going to be interactive. It's not sitting back and listening. So make sure you can make time for this fun and interactive session. When we look to our December event, the end of 2020, on December 9th, we look forward to our fellow Highlanders sharing this topic, presenting while female. These ladies, as I'm sure most of you know, are three of the most polished presenters here at Hyland. Join Colleen, Carolyn, and Carissa to learn from the very best about their experiences while presenting while female. So last bit of housekeeping, a friendly reminder to our audience live today. We welcome cameras on and an active chat in Zoom throughout today's conversation. We will reserve the last 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. So feel free to send them throughout the meeting and we'll organize questions and deliver those over to Natalie. So it's with great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who's going to talk to us about blockchain and also share aspects of her own story. When we were looking to the membership base at aligning speakers and topics for HylandWIN, we heard you guys loud and clear. You wanted to learn more about blockchain. Today's speaker is an experienced sales manager, author, blockchain expert, cultural anthropologist, and public speaker, just to name a few things. On top of that, she's also a HylandWIN member. Please join me in welcoming Natalie Smolenski. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me and for that wonderful introduction. So I am really excited to geek out with you a little bit today about blockchain and specifically about how it pertains to human social life, which, I think sometimes the conversations about blockchain get really lost in the tech. And while that's super interesting and exciting, all technology is ultimately social. And so my experience as a social scientist interested in blockchain technology. And so I'd like to connect a few dots here and then hopefully, have some time for a discussion because these topics tend to bring up a lot of thoughts and questions and, connections that people make. So please feel free to jump in. And we're also going to save time at the end for a conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some slides here just to kind of help guide us through. Um, so I'm going to do that. And all right, here we go. So Mackenzie and Colleen, can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks
All
good,
right,
Natalie.
perfect. Okay, so the agenda for this talk is super straightforward. We're going to start with anthropology. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on me and my own kind of journey from anthropology to blockchain, the questions that I was asking that led me to this space. And then we'll talk about what blockchain is and why it represents a technological achievement that is in some ways very new, but also in other ways very old. And then lastly, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Hyland Credentials. So what is it that we do? What is it that we sell? And how does it add value to the greater Hyland portfolio? So with that, let's jump in. Anthropology. So I've always been interested in the question of value. What is value? What does that mean? We use this word a lot. Many different disciplines use it from, religion, politics, economics, technology. There are so many different ways that this term is used. So what is it at root that really unites all these different expressions of value? Well, one anthropologist has suggested that value is at root the way in which actions become meaningful to the actor by being incorporated in some larger social totality. And the social part is important here because, value never exists in a vacuum. Like we don't know, how other species, for example, value things because we don't really have a sense for, how their social world coheres. And anyone who's traveled to different cultures or different contexts or, is from a different culture is very quick to realize that the way things are valued in one cultural context is often very different from how it's valued in another one. And so being able to, make translations of value or exchange things of value is also always a process of cultural translation. So, these are just some of the types of value that I've been thinking about in my work. We have on the one hand, morals, ethics, and ideals. These are, you can kind of consider those like what is seen as good in a particular cultural context. There's also exchange value, which is what we often mean by economic value. So, what are people willing to exchange or give up for an object, whether that's a product or a service or a relationship or, anything. So, price is one manifestation of exchange value. Use value is another one, so how useful is this object or, service provider or product? Linguistic value is another form of value, right? So like, what does a word mean? Well, you really can't answer that question unless you understand the whole language, because that word only takes on meaning in relationship to other words within a grammar and a syntax. And then there's an even broader understanding of value, which is significance. And some philosophers like to talk about this as how meaning itself coheres. Something takes on a particular kind of significance. Let's say, a stuffed animal to a small child has a significance to that child that it doesn't have to anyone else. But that particular child finds it an extremely meaningful object, and may even be willing to exchange many other objects for that object. And so whenever we talk about things that have a particular meaning for someone, we're talking about significance more broadly. So I did field work in a couple of different cultural contexts. I lived in Egypt for a couple of years, and I was really looking at value from the point of view of religion. Because in different religious traditions, they're often very explicit about what their value hierarchies are, and those value hierarchies end up organizing the society. So, things that are considered sacred, for example, are, very high value. And the value of other things often gets defined in terms of that sacred value. So Egypt was one cultural context where I did field work. I also did some field work in Poland, looking at the cult of saints in the Catholic Church and to some extent in the Eastern Orthodox Church as well. So these were really interesting points of comparison for me. And my initial takeaway, when I was trying to answer this question of what is the sacred, the highest possible inflection of value in a particular cultural context, I had this thought that focusing on the relationship between religion and politics may actually overlook a more fundamental struggle over what is and is not, or what should and should not be immutable or subject to change, and in what ways, as well as the nature and mechanisms of change itself. So understanding change is really crucial for understanding reproduction and continuity, and thus more globally, much of the basic functioning of human social life. So, often when people are arguing about religion, politics, and values, what they're really arguing about is, what is eternal? Like, what are the things that should not change versus, what should change and what needs to change? And it's these contestations that actually draw a trajectory of a human collective or a human society. So that kind of leads me into the blockchain, because the blockchain is all about mediating continuity amidst change. So you can think of a blockchain as a distributed ledger. So it is a ledger of transactions. It sounds very unsexy, but it is actually connected to how we remember things, right? That happened a very long time ago, or maybe in one particular cultural context that nobody else witnessed, but the blockchain witnessed it. And so it's that social memory that is being inscribed and reinscribed in the ledger architecture. And in that way, we can think of blockchain as a form of writing. There are many different ways to write. We're familiar with writing using an alphabet, but of course, language, there are love, so many different ways that we negotiate meaning. So I don't know if any of you have seen 16 with she plays who into the language of Monday. And that species has this really unusual form of writing. They create these circles that have these little splotches, and she's trying to decipher what these things mean. And she comes to the conclusion that, like their ship or their bodies, their written language has no forward or backward direction. Linguists call this nonlinear orthography, which raises the question, is this how they think? And so, this is one of the coolest anthropology movies I think ever, because it actually said on screen the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is a hypothesis in linguistic anthropology that your language actually shapes the way that you think and remember. And people sometimes experience this just in day-to-day life. Like, if you're having a thought in Spanish, that may allow you to think in ways that you don't feel like you can think in English, and vice versa. And so, this is really kind of taking that to a very large extent, where, you know, it's these circles, these non-linear forms of expression that are structuring the thought. So that kind of takes us back to what writing is. So let's go back a few thousand years in history and take a look at the birth of writing. So the very earliest forms of writing that we have record of emerged in Neolithic Mesopotamia, about 10,000 BCE to 4,500 BCE. So right in, you know, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. And what's interesting about these early forms of writing is that they weren't alphabets right out of the gate. In fact, they started out as accounting ledgers. Why? Because this was an area of profound economic activity. There was a lot of trade and exchange going on. These were the first, you know, really like major settled agricultural societies. And so they were producing economic surpluses that needed to be accounted for. And so there was an entire social caste that arose of, you know, priests and scribes who were, you know, kind of the accountants of the civilization, and they kept track of economic exchanges, credits, and debts. And they used this token system. So they created these actual objects, these tokens, to stand in for different goods and services. So some of them represented, you know, cloth. Others represented a legal decision or a trial that took place. Others represented, you know, jewelry like bracelets or rings. Others, you know, were metals or stone vessels or types of animals. And then these tokens were exchanged to symbolically represent the exchange of those actual goods and services. So everyone knew, you know, who had what. Over time, they figured out a much easier way to do this, which was that instead of actually creating the tokens and physically exchanging them, they could just draw pictures of the tokens on these tablets. And the tablets could serve as the record of these transactions. And so you see the very first accounting ledgers here. Some of these contain impressions, and that's literally where the physical tokens were like smashed into the clay. And then eventually they stopped smashing the tokens into the clay and just started drawing the tokens. And so what we have is the very first alphabet actually evolved from those tokens. So those things that represented, you know, sheep and cattle and grain, those tokens eventually became letters. And then those letters got strung together into the first alphabet. And some of you who are a little bit familiar with blockchain will see where I'm going with this. You know, blockchain technology has enabled a kind of tokenization where different blockchain networks contain their own tokens, and people trade those tokens digitally on the network. And each token represents a little piece of value on that particular network. So in some ways, we're kind of repeating history, only with a digital ledger rather than a physical ledger. So, you know, ledger keeping technology evolved quite a bit. The next major breakthrough happened in 14th century Florence with the birth of double entry bookkeeping. And this was a really important innovation because it allowed people to keep track of the state of their business. So double entry bookkeeping is just keeping a ledger with, you know, debits and credits that shows you the current state of assets and liabilities for a business. And so one of the very first ledgers was, you know, actually kept by this Florentine wool merchant in his personal diary. You know, so he'd talk about his life, his personal life, and then he'd talk about his economic life in the same book. Now, what's interesting about ledgers is that they're also political technologies. And this is something that anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss discovered when he was doing a census of tribes in the Amazonian rainforest in the mid-20th century. So he was, sent by the Brazilian government to figure out, who was out there. And he embedded himself with one particular tribe as they migrated from one campsite to another. And as they were traveling, he realized, or he noticed something really interesting. He was constantly keeping notes, as any good field worker would in his journal. And he noticed that the chief of the tribe began imitating him. So he took a paper and enacted the act of writing, which he would then read to the rest of the tribe. And Levi-Strauss kind of noticed, like, wow, well, writing is actually the superpower. And the priests and scribes of ancient Mesopotamia actually wielded a whole lot of power over that society because they were the only ones who understood the ledger. And they kept it. They could edit it at any time. They could take away or give assets. They could, in fact, change the past to make it more convenient for them or their political allies. And so this, problem of ledgers centralizing power is actually something that blockchains have emerged to solve. And the alternative to a centralized ledger is actually a decentralized ledger, where everyone has a copy of the transactions. And so no one person can actually go back and change the past, to pretend they have more money than they have, or that they have special rights and privileges that they were never given. And so anthropologists have actually looked at Polynesia, specifically this one island, this island of Yap, that has this tradition of something called Fey stones. Now, you can think of Fey stones as giant coins. These are like money. But as you can see, they're huge. You can't just go to the market with your Fey stone and give it to someone else in exchange for, a loaf of bread. You actually keep these stones in the same way that you would real estate, or a piece of property that is immovable. But the Fey stones can change ownership. So you can give your Fey stone to someone else, or you can exchange it for things. And so, if you can't move it, then you have to somehow keep track of who owns which Fey stone and, when it was given to this person and for what, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens in Yap is there is a decentralized ledger that's not written down. It's literally just in everyone's head. And everyone in the village knows which stone belongs to whom, when it was given to them, because every gifting of a stone is a public event. So there's always a whole lot of witnesses, and then that becomes knowledge throughout the entire community. And this also prevents any one person in the community from getting too powerful by, claiming that they own all of the stones. Because if someone tried to do that, everyone else would immediately speak up and say, well, that's not true. That doesn't belong to you, or that transaction never happened. And so this is actually the social version of a blockchain. A blockchain is a way of keeping track of who owns what without actually having to physically give things, from one party to another, and without having to rely on a centralized ledger like a priest or even a bank to tell us who owns what. And so you can think of Bitcoin actually as this really ancient technology. And we're seeing this in the way that the price of Bitcoin has gone up. So in July of 2010, Bitcoins were worth like 8 cents per coin. And today they're worth over $10,000 per coin. That value has fluctuated a lot, it goes up and down, but the overall trajectory has been parabolic increase. And the reason for that is that they're actually functioning like these Fey stones. Like people are treating Bitcoin as this large store of value. And each one can actually be subdivided into 100 million parts, Satoshis. And so, as Bitcoin continues to accrue in value, you, people will probably never own a full Bitcoin, but they'll own parts of a Bitcoin that they can transact with using a blockchain ledger. So you can think of a blockchain as a new memory system for the world. I mean, that's in fact what every blockchain is. Now, different blockchains are architected for different use cases. So some blockchains like Bitcoin are really designed to be money. I mean, they're designed for currency use case. Other blockchains are designed to do things like track the movement of a SKU through a supply chain. Other blockchains are designed to track legal agreements like smart contracts. And what's cool is that you can actually build other applications on top of blockchains that do things the blockchain doesn't do, but use the blockchain as a kind of anchor for transactions. And so you can do a whole bunch of stuff at the application layer and then, hash that down to a blockchain. And then that becomes recorded as part of the memory of that community. And so, you can also think of a blockchain as a modern version of quipu knots, which were a method of accounting in the Inca Empire. So the scribes of the Inca Empire kept these quipu knots where they would create knots to record things, events or transactions. Now, this is a very incomplete ledger. It's a series of knots and strings. And they actually relied on the institutional memory of the priests, the people who maintained these knots, to interpret what they meant. And so when the last of those priests died out, we actually lost the cultural memory of what these knots mean. So there are many different hypotheses that social scientists have about what they meant, but we'll never know for sure because the people who could have told us aren't around anymore. And that is kind of, what we call off-chain storage. So if you think of the quipu knots themselves as the blockchain that has that immutable record of transactions, the actual content of what it means is stored somewhere else. In the case of the Inca Empire, it was stored in the minds of the people who maintained the ledger. But today, we can use all kinds of digital memory storage for that, like a database or a phone or a laptop. And so Hyland Credentials actually uses this model of data storage where we don't put the actual meaning of the data on the chain because we want to protect the privacy of the people who are transacting with it. We don't want this to be just like readable by anyone who has access to the blockchain. But we keep the record off chain and it references the blockchain. So it's this really ingenious way of preserving memory without just making everything open and transparent to everybody. So let's talk a little bit about Hyland Credentials. Hyland Credentials is a product to design and issue credentials in a blockchain secured format that is shareable and verifiable. So that's kind of the one sentence elevator pitch. What that means is we take documents, then we run them through hashing algorithms that condense them into this digital fingerprint, which is just a long string of letters and numbers. And then we stamp that digital fingerprint onto a blockchain. Date and time is preserved. And then once it's on the blockchain, it cannot be edited. So this is permanent, and the blockchain is a permanent record that anyone can consult. And so we actually developed this technology with MIT to solve a problem of verifying academic records. MIT is a world-class university. They get tens of thousands of applications every year from all over the world, and they have to verify all of that stuff. Right now, it's really hard. I mean, they have to, even if they get like a paper credential, they still have to, call the school or use a third-party verification service to validate that this student really graduated from there. This is an authentic credential. They didn't tamper with anything to like make their grades look better. And you can do that really easily, especially with digital documents like PDFs. Any digital document can be easily edited. And even if it's digitally signed, like if there's a digital signature on that PDF protecting it, that digital signature generally belongs to a software vendor like Adobe or DocuSign or one of the credentialing vendors, and not to the actual school. And so all you know is that, well, a vendor signed this document, but I need to still check with the school to validate that the student really went there. So we realize that this creates inefficiencies for everybody. It puts a lot of work on the school to validate these documents. It also puts a lot of work on schools to share the documents. Like they're the single source of truth. So they have to be doing all the records sharing. And that kind of leaves the student out of it. Like they don't have any power, which is kind of sad because like these are their credentials, they earned them. And it's super weird that, when I received my diploma, I can't actually use that diploma for anything. Like I can't send it to someone and have it verified. I have to ask my school to send another version of the diploma that I haven't touched, that's sealed and official, to the verifier so that they know that I haven't tampered with it in any way. And so we built BlockCerts with MIT to create a digital format for official records that is tamper-proof, so no one can edit it, and that shows who it came from and who it was given to. So everything is certain now using the blockchain, and that means that the student or graduate, the end user, now has full control over that academic record for the rest of their life. So they never have to request it again. If they move to Singapore and then they move to Mexico and then they move to Germany, they have the same record. Anyone can verify it. It never has to be requested again. And it's a much higher degree of digital document security than anything else available on the market. So, BlockCerts is a standard format for these blockchain anchored credentials. It's an open standard, meaning anyone can verify BlockCerts using the open standard, and anyone can issue BlockCerts using the open standard. The BlockCert file is a JSON file, so it just uses standard JSON data format, which is what is used for transferring data via the World Wide Web. So, this technology assumes that, people are going to be sharing this online first and foremost, and verifying these credentials online first and foremost. That's the way that millennials, Gen Z, younger generations, they already expect that this is the way the world works. So it's very weird to them when they have to go back and get a paper credential. Like many of them have never addressed an envelope by the time they go to apply for college. And so this is a technology that the younger generations just intuitively understand. It's a digital file. I keep it on my phone. I can send it to anyone and they can verify it with the click of a button. So the other cool thing about BlockCerts is, I was telling you guys earlier, there are different kinds of blockchains for different use cases, but they're all at bottom verification infrastructures. And so BlockCerts can be anchored to any blockchain. So if we have a customer who, really doesn't want to use Bitcoin, they want to use a private blockchain that they own, or maybe they're required by law to use a blockchain that their government has developed for official records, we can integrate with that because we're not actually selling a blockchain. We're just selling a way to anchor documents to any blockchain. So that makes us really flexible, and that means we can work across markets really easily. This is just kind of a diagram of how the Hyland Credentials application interacts with the blockchain. So much like the World Wide Web, the commercial layer of the web is the application layer. It's not the protocols, TCP/IP, SMTP. You're not thinking about that stuff when you're sending emails or, logging into your Facebook account. That's all down the stack. And in the same way, blockchain is all the way down the stack for our solution. So you don't actually need to know anything about blockchain to use it. You don't even need to know the blockchain is there. What you're interacting with is a SaaS application that talks to the blockchain using the data standard, the block certs open standard. So block certs is kind of the translator, the language that is used to anchor the records to the chain and then to verify those records. And because it's an open standard, anyone can use it. And that's what helps us with adoption. There's no payment gateway or wall that people encounter when they're trying to verify a block cert. They don't have to be Hyland customers. And that gives our customers maximum value because they know that if they issue a block cert using Hyland software, then it doesn't matter who that block cert gets shared with. They'll be able to use it with just a web browser or a mobile phone. So it's super easy to use. And then recipients of the block certs, they get a free open source mobile app that they can download. It's just called the Block Certs Wallet. So if you have a smartphone, you can download it right now. And it generates this private passphrase that is your secret identity on the blockchain. And this is the passphrase you can use to prove that your credentials were really issued to you, that they really belong to you. So, for MIT, this was really important because they don't want to issue a blockchain anchored digital diploma to someone and then have that person share it with 50 of their closest friends. And now 50 people have an MIT diploma. But it's also important for anything that's like a property title, a land title, a title to your car, to your home. If there's ever a property ownership dispute, you can actually use this technology to prove that this deed or this title really belongs to you. And not to anyone else. So it uses public key cryptography, which is, gold standard asymmetric cryptography. The public key is actually recorded in the block cert, and then the private key is kept secret on your phone in the app. And if you ever lose your phone or get a new phone, you can just download the app again, enter this private passphrase into the wallet, and it will regenerate your private key and your credentials. So the other cool thing about this is that it is what we like to call self-sovereign, meaning this is not a vendor service. So there's no dependency on Hyland or any other vendor for you to own this wallet, own your keys, and own your credentials. And so you can get block certs from anybody who's using the open standard. It could be from a Hyland customer. It could be from a customer of some other company that's issuing block certs, but the wallet is vendor independent. There's no username or password required to log in. It's really just device level security. And so that gives you maximum freedom because you can, switch phones, you can switch vendors, you can change your email address, you can change all manner of contact information about yourself, but those cryptographic keys stay the same and you continue to own them. So this is just a quick little diagram that shows you how issuing a block cert works. It starts with the issuer. So this could be a school or a government or an insurance provider or a medical practitioner who invites you to receive a blockchain credential. They send you an email that says, hey, I'd like to issue you a block cert. And then there's a button in that email that you can click to accept their invitation. And that does the key exchange process where it sends them your cryptographic key and it sends you their cryptographic key. And so now you've done that exchange and your identities have been established and they can send you as many block certs as they need to. Those block certs then arrive via email. So you get another email. The block cert is attached to that as a JSON file. And then there's a big green button that you can click to import that into your wallet. And that's it. Once you have that, it's yours forever. That JSON file is actually the master copy of your block cert, but thanks to blockchain's decentralized verification properties, if you ever make a copy of that record, that copy also is the master copy. It preserves all of the verification features of the original. If that original is ever revoked by the issuer or if it expires, then all the other copies in the world will be revoked or expired at exactly the same time. So it really simplifies records management. And from a security standpoint, it's really important. Like, take for example, an aircraft maintenance technician. Like they have to have current credentials in order to work on a plane. If their credentials have expired, or if they get revoked for some kind of misconduct or failure to, keep up with their licensing, then it's really important they're not working on planes. And today, most of those credentials are issued on paper. And so, you have to actually mail someone a revocation and say, please destroy your credential or mail it back to us. And as you can imagine, that doesn't often happen. So this technology is really de-risking security and personnel management for entire organizations. And that's it. Anyone can verify that just by scanning it or putting it in a web browser. So, this is just to wrap up, the benefits of this are pretty clear. I mean, anything that's 10x better, faster, and cheaper will be adopted. It's just a matter of time. And that's what block certs is. It also helps organizations enhance their brand visibility and reputation because these documents are easily shareable online. People get excited about them, and so they share them, and it kind of becomes like free marketing for the issuing institution. It empowers their stakeholders, the people actually receiving the block certs, and strengthens the network of relationships. So there's definitely a social component to this as well as a technical component. I can't say it better than Mary Callahan, who was the MIT registrar who spearheaded this project. And she just retired in August. And I have to say, I was very sad, but she left a big legacy there. In large part because she brought this technology to all of the students at MIT. So today, anyone graduating from MIT has the option of receiving their diploma as a block cert. And she said, from the beginning, one of our primary motivations has been to empower students to be the curators of their own credentials. This pilot, she was still referring to a pilot, 2017, makes it possible for them to have ownership of their records and be able to share them in a secure way with whomever they choose. So that's the world we're building, my friends. Open for questions.
Amazing job, Natalie. We've got some great feedback coming into the chat, including comments like, she is a force, best explanation of blockchain ever. So there's a ton of just solid comments and excitement over not only the examples you gave, but just the presentation style. I think everyone is like at that level set, right? If you didn't know a bunch about blockchain before, or you're super familiar, maybe you didn't know how Hyland was using it, right? I think we're all at like that solid same level, but we've also got some good questions coming in from the group. I want to get through at least a few of these. We've got a handful. From Noreen Kilbane, good question. She asked, some of the documents reference never change ownership over their lifetime. For example, a diploma, while others, like a car title, could change. How does the ownership change on the blockchain?
That is a fantastic question. And there are actually multiple ways that this can be done technically. So the way that we currently do it, using the current implementation of block certs, is that we would simply revoke the old title, so it would no longer be valid, and issue a new title to the new owner. But the cool thing about verifiable credentials using blockchain is that the technology is constantly evolving. And so we're in the midst of upgrading block certs now to comply with the new W3C verifiable credential standard. And that specification enables the transfer of ownership of credentials from one party to another. So that is a capability that we will have eventually.
And actually, Natalie, do you mind hitting stop share screen?
Yeah,
We just
absolutely.
want to open up the video.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question we had from Libby Shields, and some of these you might have touched on in the presentation. These were kind of coming in as we went through. Her question is, I know credentials has been widely used in higher education and lends itself well to permanent credentials like diplomas. Do we have customers who have used credentials to issue licenses that expire or require continuing education, recertification to maintain If so, how does that work?
Yes. So we have built revocation and expiration capabilities into the BlockCert standard. And so the government of Malta, who's our largest customer today, actually uses the system to issue teaching licenses, licenses to practice law, which they call warrants, and notary warrants. All of those expire and they have to be periodically renewed.
Cool. I have a question coming in from Giovanna. She was asking, how are digital credentials tamper-proof?
They're tamper-proof. The more correct term is tamper-evident. So when you receive a JSON file, that file itself is editable, just like a PDF or a Word doc or anything else. But the version of that file that was issued to you by the issuer has been digitally signed and hashed. So a snapshot of that was taken and hashed to the blockchain. And so if you tamper with the file, and then someone tries to verify that document later, it will show that it was tampered with.
Yeah, great question. Leanne in our audience asked, as it continues to seem harder to uncover what is true, she put that in quotes, and given Natalie's depth and range of experience, I'm curious if Natalie has any thoughts about how we can potentially leverage blockchain technology to help address some of society's biggest problems today. She gave some examples like political unrest or climate change.
Yep. Yeah, so blockchain is, it was actually designed to solve this problem initially for economic transactions. As the economy continues to globalize, more and more people are, buying and selling and transacting with counterparties who they don't know. And so what blockchain does really well is it just assumes that whoever your counterparty is an adversary, that they're incentivized or motivated to lie to you. And so the ledger technology actually expends an enormous amount of computational energy to ensure that everyone's incentives are aligned and that the transactions that get written to the blockchain are, the record of truth. Now, blockchains can be gamed. So if you have a blockchain network that's pretty small, where you only have a few computers, validating these transactions, it's possible for one group of those computers to gang up and start editing the ledger. That's something called a 51% attack. And once that happens, the integrity of the blockchain network is called into question. This is why the most successful blockchains are actually the ones with the widest distribution, and they're public blockchains. So this is counterintuitive, because we're used to thinking, private means more secure. But the reality is that the vast majority of private blockchains out there don't have enough computers to really, prevent this kind of attack. And so blockchains like Bitcoin or Ethereum or some of the other big public ones are pretty safe because those attacks have been tried and they've failed and they're only growing. So they only become harder over time.
Great. I think we have one last question, then we can wrap up. But I really like this because this was actually something I was thinking about going into this topic and even just in planning the event. What, in your opinion, is a big misconception about blockchain?
Yeah, I think there are a few big misconceptions about blockchain. I think one of the big misconceptions is that if you're using a blockchain, you need to have your own blockchain. And so we'll often work with customers who really believe that in order to benefit from blockchain technology, they have to build their own and maintain it. And the opposite is true. Like building and maintaining your own blockchain costs no joke, like millions of dollars and takes years to get set up and secured. And so really it only makes sense for the largest organizations like governments or industry consortia to do that. It's for everyone else, blockchain is like the internet. Like, remember, I don't know if you remember in the 90s how like every company wanted their own intranet. because they were kind of scared of the internet. And now today, everyone uses the public internet. There are still a few intranets out there, but they're in the minority. And the same is going to happen with blockchains. Like the biggest public chains that attract the most value and users are going to become the default networks. And then if you need a special private blockchain for something and you're big enough and you have the funding, you can build your own private chain. So that's one big misconception. Another big misconception is that public blockchains are not secure, or that if you're using a public blockchain, it means all the data is public. That's actually not true. The blockchain ledger is public, but what actually gets recorded on the ledger is not like plain text readable data. It's hashing and transaction timestamping and keys. And so it allows you to prove this party really sent me, an asset on this date and time, but you can't see what that asset was. You can't even see, who the receiving party was very often. So they're pseudonymous, rather than anonymous infrastructures.
Great. Thanks again, Natalie, so much. As we wrap up, on behalf of, not just the HylandWIN community, but all of the members, we're getting such great feedback and responses in the chat. I'm sure the Hyland community as a whole will also engage in the recording. So we'll send a link to everyone with the survey from today's presentation. Also, a peak of interest is future topics. So if blockchain piqued your interest and you're interested in maybe a series or to learn more in the future, please engage in that survey with the HylandWIN community. And on behalf of all of us, thank you again, Natalie. Great job.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you, Natalie. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.